I'd like to start off first of all by thanking Ron and Maya. Ron, Maya, wherever you are, it looks like every year when this conference is a huge success, it would be almost impossible to up the bar to the next level, but every year you manage to do it again. So compliments and congratulations. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. She's a remarkable lady. She began her legal career practicing in a dispute resolution department of a highly prestigious Israeli law firm. Then 2 years later, she jumped into the cold water of the world of startups. And she had joined 2 startups, one in the field of music, copyright protection, the other one in the field of nanotechnology, and she has navigated one of those startups into a very successful exit. Later on, she was invited to join the legal department of a company that at the time was a Nasdaq-listed company and which was one of the world leaders in all things that were Wi-Fi, a company called Alvarion, and months later she became the general counsel of that company. In 2010, she was invited to join the legal department of Frutarom and to head it as its general counsel. And since then, she has closed almost 40 M&A deals worldwide, which is not only by an Israeli standard, but also by an international standard, a remarkable achievement. And by doing that, today, the company has a market cap which is north of $4 billion US. I can also say, if I may, on a more personal note, as someone who's worked with her on deals in the past, while she juggles many, many times approximately 10 deals at a time, when you work with her on a deal, you get her undivided attention as if it is the only deal she's working on. And at the end, when the result is successful, you feel highly rewarded as part of a joint team effort, and that is extremely unique. So without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Tali Mirsky, the General Counsel of Frutarom. Tali, I'm not going to ask you to jump on the stage, don't worry.
Well, I think after this long introduction, I think I just need to say thank you for inviting me and get off the stage. You know, that's going to be the top of it. So.
With pleasure. Does this work? Okay. Wow, Tali, you hardly make public appearances, so thank you very much for being here. And we hope we can open a little bit a door into your life, professional life. And perhaps by starting and asking the obvious questions, 40 M&A deals worldwide, is there a point where they start repeating themselves and they start looking like the same deal every now and then, or do they always look different?
Well, in Frutarom, doing M&A transactions is really our daily work, so you can say it's a routine. You know, we're a very, very small team. I'd like to say we're like commando team, doing M&A work really in so many countries. So on one hand, it's the day-to-day and similar things. You know, the basics of M&A deals are similar, but it continues to be very, I think, interesting, at least for me, because we do so many different deals, meaning we do different structure of deals. I think Frutarom is very creative about the way we restructure our deals. We are very flexible. We're trying to think what can work for this specific transactions, so it's not, we don't have like, this is the way we do things, this is our template, this is how we do it, and everything is automatic. It's much more specific and different. Another thing that makes it still interesting is that, on one hand, we can buy, we buy a lot of family-owned companies. So then we deal with individuals, sometimes people who sell the business of their lives, businesses that started 100 years ago and maybe even more. So you deal with individuals. Negotiation tends to be much more emotional because, these people are selling something, first of all, it's most cases, it's their first M&A deal ever. It's very different than their regular business doings. And then you'll see on the other side, lawyers. I've done a deal in the UK where the lawyer on the other side was a 93-year-old guy from a small town in the UK. He was the trusted lawyer of the family, so we couldn't even try to ask the sellers to consider changing the lawyer for this transaction, and then we had to handle it. Recently, I did a transaction in South Africa, and I was very surprised to find that the lawyer on the other side is the family's lawyer, but he's also a family lawyer. So he's like a divorce lawyer. Again, he had many interesting inputs into the transaction, but not necessarily on the M&A, the pure M&A side. On the other hand, we can buy companies from big investors, from banks even, from large multinational companies, and then we deal with a different type of people. Negotiations are very different, less emotional, more professional. I did a deal in Canada like 2 years ago. The seller was the largest pension fund in Quebec. So obviously the lawyer on the other side was like top M&A lawyer. For me, it was much more difficult to find a top M&A lawyer that is not conflicted because everyone worked for this pension fund. So this makes a difference. And I think what makes most different is the cultural gap. Because when you do transaction in so many different places, you meet different people on the other side, and the culture and also the local way of doing business makes a lot of difference. And what we usually do is we try to do a deal based on local market practice. Again, we're not coming with, this is our type of way of doing business. We're not coming with our own template saying, that's how we do it and take it or leave it. No, we say, okay, we understand it's a local business. General taste is a local business, so we have a lot of understanding about, why local things are important. And culture, it's a challenge, but also sometimes you find it surprisingly, or you find nice surprises. Like I did a deal in India 2 years ago, and I love India. But my first business experience in India was really not good, and I was coming to a meeting in Bangalore, India, when I had in mind this not very pleasant past experience. And then I found myself sitting in a room with, we bought a company from a very wealthy, sticky family, and I was in a room in Bangalore sitting with, I think, 6 more women. They were all lawyers on both sides, me and the business development, from our business development team with me. And the owner, he started the meeting by saying, I'm feeling very privileged doing this transaction with an international company where most of the people in the room and most of professionals are women. So this was a nice surprise and on the cultural side.
In terms of timing, what is the average time you dedicate for an M&A deal?
Well, it really depends. Sometimes we start a process and it takes years because we just maintain very good relations with customers, with family-owned businesses that we know, and we cook it very quick, very slowly to the point where the sellers are ready to sell and hoping that they will sell to us and keep the that's what became very popular is all these bid processes and competition, and so it may take time. In other situations, it's a bid process, so everything is very structured and you need to meet the deadline. And I think Ariel, in the deal we did together in Italy, I think it was less than 10 days from the date we submitted our binding proposal. And actually, we didn't think we have we didn't think our chances are high to win. And just 10 days after 5 a.m. Rome. We were sitting in a room, signing the transaction, and then looking for the only, I think, restaurant in Rome that serves steaks at 5 a.m. So it really varies.
So that was one of your shortest deals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the process in your company. So, I mean, you are scouting hundreds of deals a year. When do you see that a deal becomes from just one more deal that your team scouts into a reliable, serious, possible M&A deal that you may actually pursue?
Well, I guess over time you learn, how to get the senses of, what's going to fly quickly and what's not. But it really depends, it depends, first of all, I think it depends of how keen we are to do the transaction. Because sometimes I know that this target, we're gonna make it, we're gonna have this transaction closed no matter what, and then, we invest more time and efforts. Obviously, we are more flexible, and we give it a higher priority. Sometimes, again, it's just the bid process that requires you to be very quick and meet the deadlines. And sometimes you just don't know. I can tell you that now we are negotiating a transaction in another Asian country. We met the sellers for the first time. They were not in selling mode, but they were willing to come over and meet us. And after a week of negotiations, they were really convinced we are very good partners for them, and we signed a quick LOI. And we said, okay, we're going to be very quick. We set very aggressive timelines. And then when they went back home, and we started to do our real homework about how do you do a deal in this country, we realized it's not going to be quick, not at all. It's not a country where it's easy to do international transactions, and structure will take time, and drafting and signing is really remote. And then we were trying to think, how do we keep the momentum? Because they were not in the selling mode, but now that they were exploring the opportunity, maybe they'll go to others. So we were looking for some ways to keep the momentum while we are busy with all these technicalities and structuring, etc. And one of them came with an idea of opening a WhatsApp group. So now I'm a part of a WhatsApp group, on top of all my kindergarten, school, Sofim, whatever, of this targets. And I get to see what they're doing, trade shows, etc. But I'm not sure if it will work, but at least we're hoping that it will prevent the others or will keep the competitors away. And by this time, you will gain time to work on the more legal, tax, structuring, and the formalities.
Okay. Now, juggling so many deals at the same time, there is the issue of legal expenses, and you don't want to retain outside counsel immediately. So how do you manage, in terms of your team in-house, as much of the process as you can before you actually outsource the work or involve outside counsel? And maybe a few words on how do you choose your outside counsel?
Okay, so indeed, because we're doing so many transactions, maybe because we're experienced, but mostly because we are very budget-oriented, we try to do as much as we can internally. For sure, the initial stages of the transaction, so the proposals, the term sheets, LOIs, everything we do internally. This is the only stage in the transaction where we really try to keep our templates or our formats and be less creative in order to be efficient and be able to do so many different transactions at the same time. So we try to involve lawyers later, after we know that we have initial understanding that financials and business-wise we are on the right track. But in certain cases, you need to know more about the transaction. You need to know more about the local way of doing business at early stage. So what I do, if it's a first transaction in a new jurisdiction, I usually use the introduction calls that I do in order to find or to select the right lawyer, to get some sense on the market practice, and sometimes to ask questions that are very specific that I'm interested in knowing before I'm interested in retaining a law firm. And in other cases, if it's a jurisdiction that I know and there's a lawyer that I know from experience, then I just, I can give a quick call and ask specific questions. Usually I won't involve them in the transaction itself until it's really at least half cooked.
I want to take you back in time now to the moment you joined Frutarom. I mean, you've been in Alvarion for many years before that. You've done many, many things as GC there. You did some M&A work, but not substantial compared to what you're doing in Frutarom today. And there you joined this company that's very M&A driven, where there is a team that's very experienced. They know how to work with each other. And you jump into the cold water. How do you adjust quickly to this new reality of doing M&A deals globally on a very sophisticated, fast-track manner? And also, if you can give some advice to some general counsels here who have not done M&A work, and maybe tomorrow they will receive their first international M&A deal, and they will need to think what are the first steps they should do.
I'm not sure when I joined Frutarom, I'm not sure I realized how M&A driven it is, and that M&A is going to be my real day-to-day work. And when I joined the company, before I even knew how to spell the name Frutarom correctly, I did my first 2 M&A deals. Within the first 6 weeks, we closed the transaction in the UK and in Norway, very different jurisdictions. You know, one was from 2 old gentlemen, an asset deal, UK style, meaning 100 pages long without annexes. The other was Norway, buying a business from a large company, share deal, 20 pages, and you're done in Norway. It's very quick and simple. And as you said, I didn't know much about the company, and my M&A experience was limited. So firstly, the person who helped me most to get used to Frutarom and to understand the language is Roy Kahani from my team. I don't know, he's here, I don't know where. Okay. And the internal M&A team, which is, as I said, very small, but also very experienced. And obviously, the first M&A deals, I relied more on the internal, on the external lawyers. And over time, you know, I learned to do more and more internally. And for the tips, I think when you do your first transactions, it's very important to choose the right lawyer, external lawyer to work with. I think it's very important to get a basic understanding about the market and how it works, and you know the expectations of the other parties. And for me, again, because we do so many different, type of transactions, and then I would not work with a top M&A lawyer if I go to negotiate a very small deal in a country where I think, it's better to have someone really local than someone international, or so it's also, I'm trying to find the right fit between the size of the transaction, the type of people on the other side, the sellers. So it's a combination, and I can tell you that I'm still, trying to find the right formula, to find the right external lawyers. Sometimes it works very well, and then I know I have my partner for the next transaction in the same jurisdictions, and sometimes I'm less successful, and then I need to struggle once again.
Let's talk about successes. What, in your eyes, is the key, or are the key components that make an M&A deal a success?
I think for me, it's all about the people on both sides, and not just during the negotiation, but generally. And what we learned in Frutarom over the time is that it is one of the key success factors is keeping management of the business that we acquire on board and invested. So while a few years ago we used to buy 100% and that's it, over time we started to introduce incentive plans, or like earn-out or other plans to keep management more invested. And in the last couple of years, we do more and more transactions where we keep, or even sometimes even push the sellers to keep an equity stake. So they are really invested. So they are really, they really feel that it's a partnership rather than they were acquired. And this makes a big difference. And when we negotiate, we also keep in mind all the time that these people are going to be our partners the day after. So it's important to keep the atmosphere good. It's important to remember that, you know, the day after, if there are issues or you need to go for liability issues or indemnity, then you need to find the right mechanism so it won't interfere with our business or daily relations. So really, the human part is, I think, the most important.
Let's talk about the main points that you find in M&A deals that are always the sticking points when you negotiate a deal, always the points in which there is the hardest negotiation, and possibly also the points that eventually could be the deal breakers in deals.
I think main points are quite obvious. Okay, people want to. I heard the guys talking about the Keter deal, and I was like, wow, they were very smart and successful to do a deal with zero liability. These are my shares. I sell them to you, and goodbye. This is the price. It's fixed, and there's no price adjustment, nothing. So I think this is really. You know, I think they're brilliant, but reality, at least, you know, the transactions I see tends to be different. You see in competitive processes that sellers are pushing more and more to as-is deals, but most of the deals we do, we end up arguing a lot over liabilities and limitations and indemnifications. You know, seller wants to go home, sell the business and sleep quietly and make sure that nobody is going to chase them later for their money. So this is very important. In some jurisdictions, you find that the publicity is very sensitive because now we are a public company. We acquire small companies from individuals. In some jurisdictions, they're really concerned about the fact that their name is going to be in the news with the amount of money they received, and it's sometimes an issue. It's a surprising issue, but it's an issue as well. I think these are the main things. Sometimes it's critical for the sellers to know in advance that we understand the market practice. You know, I said earlier that I tend to involve lawyers, external lawyers, at a later stage. But I can tell you that recently I did a deal in Ireland, and the seller from the very first call, he told me, Tali, do you know how to do transactions in Ireland? Do you know that Ireland is very different than the US? Do you know that there is a difference between reps and warranties here? It's not the same. And all these kind of questions. And then I realized that I need someone local, you know, at an earlier stage. So at a certain point, I just decided to involve an Irish law firm. And they were part of the negotiations in the LOI because I really felt I need to give them the confidence that, you know, we will end up talking about liabilities and indemnities and limitations, but we'll do it in an Irish style.
Let's talk about that moment when you see that the deal is going really, really bad and it may end up not concluded. How can you save a deal that goes bad?
I think the best thing is just to jump on a plane, meet the sellers, if possible without advisors in the room, sorry. And I think really it's an old trick, but you know, today we do a lot of transactions without meeting the sellers. We meet them in person, you know, in the very early stages, but negotiations, sometimes these days we do it, you know, over the phone and video conferences, and usually you can tell in certain jurisdictions, I can tell you, you can't do M&A transaction in Poland without sitting in the same room with the Polish guys. And by the way, as a Polish, I can tell you that whatever people say about, you know, all these jokes about Polish people, they're all based on a true story. But so sometimes we know we have to go and meet the other side. Sometimes there are no expectations, and it's very clear that there's no need for a meeting. And then I would only go if I feel that, you know, we're about to lose the deal or something doesn't work through the advisors and telephone conferences, etc. I think that's the trick.
Where do you think, as a general counsel of a company like Frutarom, is your money time, your sweet spot when you come to a deal?
I think my money time is the money time of the deal. You know, the last stages where everything becomes very more tense and more intensive. then I believe that, my ability, first of all, to sleep very little and to remain very focused, to keep smiling during these difficult situations, but really I think to combine maybe experience and flexibility and creativity, because at the last stages, you need to, at a certain point, you understand that you need to close everything. Sometimes you have a deadline, even if it's internal. Sometimes it's just, you know that if you'll go out of the room without achieving a closure, then maybe it won't happen later. And then I try to combine all those together and mainly keep the good atmosphere. For me, negotiations can be kept in a nice atmosphere in most cases. So that's what I try to do.
How do you juggle everything together? I mean, you're doing so many deals in the same time. You have also day-to-day legal requirements that your legal department needs to follow. What's the secret?
No real secret. Here I don't have any a real trick. I really juggle. I have 3 kids at home. I try to be there for them as much as I can. I'm super committed to my job, so I juggle and I get to sleep less. Or I can tell you that my team in Alvarian used to say that I sleep on a case-by-case basis. So.
Okay. Any questions from the audience to Tali? Please.
Oh, thank you. I'm interested in your thoughts after the transaction is over with the hard work related to integration and whether you have some tips related to it.
Tips for integration? First of all, when the deal closed, we are so busy with the next one. Ariel can tell you he was shocked when we did this deal in Italy. So for us, signing is everything. We sign and then we already are busy with the next one. So nobody shows up for the formal closing meetings, and Ariel was alone with the notary, I believe. But what we do is really, first of all, we try to plan in advance. Okay, and one of our keys, I think, secret, or one of the key ways to ease the PMI, the post-merger integration, is to keep management on board. So at least for the first a year or two, it depends on the timing, there's someone that keeps running the business. I cannot say it's the same way, but in a similar way that the business was managed before. It doesn't apply to all transactions, because there are deals where we buy and integrate very quickly, and we don't leave the company as is to continue to operate. But I think in our business, it's a bit easier than like in high-tech transactions, because you don't need to integrate the platforms, you don't need interoperability and all these type of things that makes transactions more complicated. In most cases, we are able to keep the company in place, keep management, again, educated about Frutarom, try to leverage from the synergies, to cross-selling, all these things that we, that are the basics for our transactions, but without, there's no revolution over immediately after the transaction. It's much more an evolution of the companies we buy.
Any more questions?
They want to eat.
Okay, perfect. Time's up.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Tali. Tali, you know that I'm a big fan of yours for a long time. And when we heard that you're coming over, it was irreversible. Irreversible.